What's going on, folks? Ted from Immersion here, and I've made that video about the top 10 things I want D&D 5e, 6e, basically stuff I'd like to see in the release that comes out in 2024 with the updated, reborn, revitalized, whatever the mechanics are for this new version of the core rules. And I made that top 10 and I gave some bonuses. I've actually thought of another 10 things that I'd like to see, and I'll list them off to you here, and we'll see. Again, some of these may be kind of likely, others kind of a far-off dream that we might not get. But anyway, let's dive into that. Before, though, again, as per usual, if you haven't subscribed to the channel and you like what I do here and want to consider supporting me, subscribing is the easiest way to do that. It's free. It doesn't cost anything. There's also merchandise, a whole bunch of different stuff here. You can click the join button there if you'd like to. There's a variety of different tiers to help support the channel if you so wish, but that's up to you. Anyway, that's enough of that. Let's dive in. I also ranked these in a sort of way, I think, in probably least likely to most likely. But, you know, I want all of these, so I don't necessarily want one more than the other. Number 10. Epic levels. By that, I mean, and some folks will know what I mean, but I mean content that takes you beyond level 20. Let's say you happen to have the miracle situation where you get to start a campaign at level 1, you progress at whatever pace you guys think is good, and you get through the whole story of character development, magic items, and you finally reach level 20 and you beat the big bad of the overall campaign, and everybody's super jazzed about it. Then what? You just retire that character? I mean, I guess that's what most people end up doing because there's not a lot of great content. Yes, there's some monsters that are designed to be faced at, you know, potentially beyond level 20. And there are a ton of awesome third-party resources out there to continue your campaign into epic levels. And, like, there's a couple of things about rewards in the DMG, about, like, charms and epic boons. But it's super light, and it's almost like it was kind of tacked on as an afterthought. In earlier editions, we had gotten things of epic level things to take you beyond level 20 and you know, several levels beyond that. And then content and stuff based around that, feats, magic items, what happens when you level your character beyond level 20. And I think that would be really cool, especially if we've had all of these players who've been playing 5e for the past 10 years. I'm not going to say it's everyone, but there's probably at least a handful of groups, or maybe significantly more than that, I don't know, sound off in the comments if that's you, that have gotten their characters to level 20, and it's that bittersweet moment of time to retire the character because the campaign's over and I can't progress anymore. But then all of a sudden, if Wizards of the Coast was just like, I'll be honest, I don't think it's going to come in these revised 3 books. Maybe we'll get a 4th book, like an epic level handbook. But I would love something like that, because then think about how much joy people would have to be able to dust off those old character sheets and bring those old characters back to continue their adventures on into epic levels. Again, super unlikely because this is just a revitalization and sort of reimagining adjustments of rules, not an entirely new set, but, you know, I can still keep wishing for it. Number 9. Feats separated from ability score improvements. I was originally against this. I liked the simplicity of you choose a feat or an ability score improvement, but as time has gone on, and I've seen a lot of outcry from this in comments and things, that people would like to decouple feats from ability score improvements. And for those of you who don't know, again, I can speak to 3.5 because I know it. They were separate. You got ability score improvements, although it was only by a +1 on every 4 levels, you know, 4, 8, 12, and so on. And you got feats at every 3 levels, 3, 6, 9, 12, and they were separate. I realized this was an effort in 5th edition to condense things down and make stuff easier, so, and again, feats are technically a optional rule, which is why I probably think this won't happen. But yeah, feats are, if you look at it, feats are technically an optional rule in 5th edition. Your DM has every right to say, I won't allow feats in my game, which means you're only limited to ability score improvements. In the very rare instance, this might possibly become an issue if you happen to roll ridiculous stat rolls. And if you were to do that, that would mean that, like, potentially I'm talking, like, really ridiculous, where, like, you don't need ability score improvements anymore because you've gotten all the stats you need maxed out. Again, super unlikely, but they made it an optional rule so that if you don't want to add that level of complexity of trying to figure out what feats to get and into the game, that's why it's optional, which is why I also think it's unlikely that they'll separate these out. But it would be cool to have maybe like a variant rule where it says like variant rule separating ability scores from feats, and it would tell you to do however you want to do it. I don't think you'd want to have them happen at both at like the level 4, 8, and so on, because that would make level 4 so powerful. If it was like you get a feat and an ability score improvement, both at level 4, that's a huge power jump depending on what people pick, especially if you have like one of the half feats where it gives you a +1 to an ability score and other stuff, potentially giving you a +3 to one ability score at level 4. And then I don't know if you continue that onwards or not, and then that would make, again, things like a fighter potentially better, or you know, depending on how you want to handle it, because they have the extra ability score improvement. Same thing with a rogue. So again, I think it might be okay as like a variant rule if people want to run a more high-powered campaign, some sort of tier system or however they want to do it to make that. Again, I feel like it's super unlikely, but I have seen a fair amount of people asking for and saying they're actually doing that in their game, or they're doing what I suggested or mentioned there, where they are giving everybody an ability score improvement and a feat. Maybe that's just at level 4 and then it's options after the fact, but that first one to give everybody the option of both so that they can get the improvement to their ability scores that they want to make themselves feel a little bit more powerful, but also get the uniqueness and sort of gameplay changing abilities of a feat to make their characters more diverse. I don't know. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Maybe I'm way off base. Number 8. Again, something I don't think we'll see, but more attunement slots or adjustments to attunement slots. As we know right now, the Artificer is the only way in the game that you can get additional attunement slots to attune to more than 3 magic items. Again, from people who have played RPGs or older editions and stuff like that, you're used to sort of an equipment slotted system where like I can wear one thing on my head, one thing on my neck, I can wear one piece of armor, one pair of gloves, one pair of pants, one pair of boots, and so on. And that was kind of how things were handled in older editions. You were limited to where you could place things on your body. Like you could only maybe wear 2 rings and earrings and a necklace or however that would work, but you could build out a crazy amount of magic items. I get why they didn't do that in 5th edition, because that's just a ton of upkeep and paperwork and stuff like that. So the concept of the attunement system means, hey, you only have to choose 3 very impactful things. Make your choices wisely. But as we all know, those attunement slots can fill up real quick. And depending on what you have and what you build out for your character, you can kind of feel stagnant in your magic item choice, because like there's potential that you might get something relatively early on in your character's career, and you've had this attunement magic item since you were level 5, and you're now level 16, and that attunement slot basically is like that's what that slot's for. It's for this item I got at level 5, and I'm never going to take it off. A great example that just comes to mind off the top of my head would be something like an Amulet of Health, the one that makes your Constitution score 19. Let's say you had a Constitution score of 12 at level 5, and you got this magic item. It bumps your Constitution score up to 19, and you've been rocking that your whole time, and you haven't put points in Constitution. Why would you? Your Amulet makes it a 19. But like that slot is forever reserved for that magic item. You're never going to swap it out. So you're also, sorry if you hear kind of snoring, my dog's under the desk snoring. But again, you're never going to swap out that magic item. So potentially adding in more. I don't know what the right answer is. Could it be something along the lines of a feat that you're allowed to take that gives you access to more more attunement slots? I've seen a lot of people add these in. I've even done it in my own games where people can take a feat to get 1 more attunement slot. Should attunement slots be tied to proficiency bonus, perhaps, where you start off with 2, so at the beginning you can't overload yourself with magic items, but you eventually end up with a maximum of 6 attunement magic items? I don't dislike that. I actually think that might not... I'm not going to say that it's 100% balanced, but you know, that gives you the difference of, because then people start shopping if they're able to for non-attunement magic items, right? Like Cape of the Mountebank, +1 armor, +1 shield. But like there might be a really cool attunement set of armor, but you're like, I'm never going to wear that because I don't have attunement slots. But if, you know, hey, we're going to be level 9 Lex level, That bumps our proficiency bonus up to level 4. Now I can attune to another magic item. That might work mechanically. Some folks may want it to be universally in the lore as to why. Maybe it's as you're gaining more powerful, the gods of magic allow you to you've gained the notoriety and the capabilities as an adventurer to now allow your body to handle the burden of more magical items attunement wise. I don't know. Let me know what you think. I might make a separate video on that concept entirely, but I do think that could be a fun way to change things up and a true revitalization of the rules. Number 7. Maneuvers being universal, or maybe not all of them, but some of them. And by this, I mean things that like the Battlemaster fighter has access to. I can't speak for everybody, but I'm sure some of you or most of you have encountered this at some point in your campaign. Hey, I want to fight this guy, I want to trip him. Right, I want to use my quarterstaff. I'm a monk, I'm a fighter, I'm a wizard, whatever I am, and I have my quarterstaff, and this guy's running, and I want to try to knock his legs out from underneath him and trip him. Technically, there's no written mechanic for you to be able to do that. If you are a Battlemaster fighter, you could make a tripping attack, which is specifically done to do that. And again, in older editions, a lot of the stuff that you see as maneuvers for the Battlemaster fighter were just things that people could do. Anybody could do it, right? In a tripping attack, pushing attack, shoving attacks, sundering, right? Or disarming, knocking weapons out of people's hands. There's also the concept of sundering, which was trying to break enemy things. Again, we know that in some instances, we know what the armor class and the hit points are of certain items. There were builds, at least again, I can speak to 3.5, where you could build a sundering build where your whole mechanic was destroying enemy armor, destroying an enemy spellbook, their weapon. You had sundering, improved sundering, and whole feat trees and stuff to be designed around destroying enemy items. But I don't know, because Battlemaster fighter people really like, and I understand the reasoning why. It does add a lot of versatility to something that can be, in some instances, mundane, like a fighter. But wouldn't it be better if everybody could do things like that? Like tripping attack, it's available to anybody who has, melee weapons. Maybe you make it proficiency-based. Anybody who has proficiency in melee weapons can do tripping attacks, can do disarming attacks, things like that, because right now the only way to really get access to that outside of being a Battlemaster fighter is either taking that one fighting style from Tasha's Cauldron that gives you a maneuver, or taking the Martial Adept feat, which also gives you a maneuver. And maybe I'm just enjoying this because in my current campaign that I'm playing in, as part of like a level up magical item thing, my DM gave me once per short rest, I can use as a monk a maneuver of my choice as long as I can make it make sense with the attacks and the abilities that I'm using. And that's been super impactful for me because I've been able to make that key move like, hey, and I'm using like a meteor hammer rope dart in the game. And that's been an option for me to be like, oh, I'm going to trip them. I'm going to shoot it out at their leg, or I'm going to try to like knock their weapon out of their hand with a disarming attack. And that's been really fun for me. I can do it once a short rest, and it's been like, it's added a whole nother level of complexity to the combat, and I've had a blast with it. And I think that if some of these were available to everyone, it would make combat that much more interesting and tactical. Number 6. Improved dual wielding. I feel like dual wielding was kind of almost an afterthought in 5th edition. I've never, maybe I'm in a minority here, and again, you guys tell me, but I have never used or played in a campaign with anybody who has gone focusing on dual wielding, because the amount of investment it seems to take to make it be beneficial isn't really ultimately worth the benefit, right? So for those of you who don't know, dual wielding in 5th edition is you're wielding one weapon in one hand and another weapon in the other. It's standard dual wielding, but normally they have to both be lightweight weapons. They have to have the light property, which usually limits you to things that are either a D4 or a D6 in damage. So you'll never have as much outright damage as someone who's wielding, like, say, a long sword for a D8 or two-handed for a D10, or obviously like a two-handed great axe or a great sword or something. So what happens is whenever you take an attack with your main hand weapon that is light, you can make an offhand attack as a bonus action. Okay. But that offhand attack with the bonus action doesn't add your modifier in the damage. So if you're using a dexterity-based 2 short swords, this does a d6 plus dex mod, offhand does just a d6. Now, if you'd like to upgrade to be able to wield 2 weapons that are, say, larger, like 2 long swords or 2 battle axes or a battle axe and a warhammer, you need to take a feat called Dual Wielder, which allows you to wield 2 non-light weapons. It also allows you to draw 2 weapons at the same time. So that's a feat investment. That being said, even though I could be wielding 2 long swords, this one does a d6 or d8 plus my strength mod. This one does a d8. The only way to get them to do both full damage is to take the fighting style 2-weapon fighting. That's available to fighters right out the gate. It's available to rangers, and for anybody else who wants to get 2-weapon fighting, they need to take the feat, fighting initiate that gives them access to it. So even if you are someone like a paladin who has access to a fighting style, 2-weapon fighting isn't on your list of options. So to get to truly do the most possible damage and get the most damage out of it, it will take a feat and a fighting style, potentially 2 feats, depending on how you look at it. And ultimately, all you're doing with all of this is just getting 1 extra attack around as a bonus action, which sounds like it could be good, but a lot of the classes and people that I see typically using this have access and useful things to do as their bonus action. For example, a ranger or a rogue dual-wielding daggers. A lot of them have useful things to use their bonus action for every turn. Rogues can use cunning action every turn as a bonus action. Rangers can use access to things like Hunter's Mark and other things like that, spells that they can cast, Zephyr Strike, all these different spells and things they can do as a bonus action. If you happen to be a Beastmaster Ranger or a Drake Warden or whatever the case may be, your bonus action is usually going to be devoted to having your pet or your other mechanic do something there. So, okay, and then it's like, well, a fighter, if you wanted to do dual wielding, you'd be competing essentially with Second Wind, which is fine. But like classes, for example, like a Paladin doesn't really have, for the most part, depending on the subclass, really anything good to do as a bonus action. They'd be a prime candidate for 2-weapon fighting. It's another opportunity for you to be able to smite. If you miss with your main hand, you could smite with your offhand, but they don't have immediate access to it. They have to get it through a feat or multi-classing. So I don't know what the right answer is to make 2-weapon fighting feel like I took all this investment to do this and I can just do 1 more strike as a bonus action, assuming I don't have anything else to do with it. I don't want to necessarily make it OP where I could do 1,000,000 different strikes and it's crazy like that. Maybe look at the whirlwind attack kind of thing from the hunter fighter or hunter ranger. Maybe you can adapt some kind of concept like that. 5th edition doesn't seem to like the concept of feat trees, which obviously it was. I know in 3rd edition it was a huge feat tree concept, 2-weapon fighting, improved 2-weapon fighting, greater 2-weapon fighting, all of these concepts to build up to be able to do more stuff with your offhand. I'm not saying that we need to go that route, but maybe there's something we can do to adjust it, and this would be a great time for Wizards to reevaluate that as we go into this new edition, or updated version of 5th edition. Number 5. Fixed capstone abilities. I think this is probably going to be one of the major things we will see. And by that, when I reference capstone, I mean high-level abilities either for your class or your subclass. Usually your level 20 thing for your main class, or perhaps your level 17 to 20 option for your subclass, depending on what you have. And that's just because there's a large disparity between abilities. Some are amazing and super fit the ability, others kind of lackluster and boring. Great examples would be the Barbarian at level 20 gets a +4 bonus to their strength and a +4 bonus to their constitution, and the maximum for those increase. So if you happen to find yourself in a situation where you have 20 strength and 20 constitution, you now have a 24 strength and a 24 constitution, which not only will increase your damage, your hit points by a significant amount, you will have increased your hit points by 40 at that point at level 20. You also will have increased your armor class by 2. A whole bunch of stuff gets benefits. Again, these are also high level stuff, so The reason I think that there's differences there is that most people don't play that far, but if we do get epic level stuff from what I was referencing earlier, this could be more useful to, like, yeah, I don't know, the sorcerer, I forget what it is off the top of my head, but it's basically like when you start a combat without sorcery points, you get to, like, you get a couple back, or you might get to roll or something like that, and it's just like, does that really even out? It's called Sorceress Restoration. When you regain 4 sorcery points whenever you finish a short rest. Okay, that, I guess that's okay, but you know, I look at, like, a monk gets all their key points back on a short rest. Which, speaking of the monk, if we were to look at the monk's 20th level ability, Perfect Self, when you roll initiative and have no key points remaining, you regain 4 key points. Again, I have 20 key points at this point. I know monks are usually starving for that, but in a short rest, I get all of them back. I think it's a similar thing with the bard. They also get a certain amount of bardic inspirations back. Superior inspiration. Oh, and the bard, they get all of their maximum 5 bardic inspirations, typically, back on a short rest. When you roll initiative and have no uses of bardic inspiration left, you get 1 use. So you can see that some of these, they were trying to go for similar things, but if you were, again, like I said, I mentioned the Barbarian. How about the Cleric getting Divine Intervention to just work all the time whenever they use it? The Paladin has all of their different abilities. Their subclass abilities all come online. The final ability at level 20, which are all super, like, game-changing abilities. How about the fact that the Archdruid can use Wild Shape an unlimited amount of times? They ignore verbal and somatic components of their druid spells, and they can do that, and any material components that lack a cost aren't consumed by the spell, and they get this all the time, and they already have at 18th level beast spells, so they can cast while in wild shape, and now they can wild shape an unlimited number of times. Those are very strong. I mean, the wizard can just cast certain spells and unlimited, like, they just know spells that they can cast. What is it for a wizard? I think do rogues get a second, like, they can just turn a miss into a success, or they get a second turn or something? Signature spells, choose 2 spells of 3rd level, you automatically know them, they don't count against your number of spells prepared, and you can cast them each once without expending a spell slot, once per short or long rest. Clearly, very big differences in that, so I would like these evened out. And I mean, also just within the classes, subclasses as well, right? For example, take a look at the Forge Domain Cleric's 17th level ability versus the War Domain's Cleric's 17th level ability. It's very much a product of the time and when things were created. Just as a quick reference, the Forge Domain's 17th level ability is: you become immune to fire damage, and while wearing heavy armor, have resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, slashing damage from non-magical attacks. Again, you're probably going to be wearing heavy armor because you get a lot of benefits from that. So flat-out immunity to one of the most common damage types in the game in fire, and resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, slashing damage, compared to the War Domain Cleric, which is resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, slashing from non-magical weapons. So you get the exact same things a War Domain Cleric has, but also immunity to fire. How is that balanced? It's not. So again, just overall fixing and adjustments of capstones to make them more balanced overall. And at some point I will make a video where I go through and try to fix all of the capstones that I think need adjustments. Number 4. A well-integrated digital tool set. This one I do think is pretty likely, whether that's Wizards of the Coast buying D&D Beyond, or, you know, partnering 100% with D&D Beyond, whether it's them fully supporting some format, whether it be Roll20 Fantasy Grounds or some homebrew thing that they've got cooked up. They just need it to be integrated from day one. They really missed the boat on not having some form of digital tool set for 5th edition from the launch. I mean, they even had like a CD-ROM of like a character creator back in 3rd edition. I think when the 3E Player's Handbook launched, it came with a CD in the back that was like an online character, or like a local-based character creation tool. And I think they were gonna make one for 4th edition. I can't remember if they ever rolled it out or not. But the only thing I can think of is the reason they didn't do it for 5th edition is they didn't know it was going to be as big as it ended up being ultimately. That's not a great excuse or a great answer, right? You should strive to have your things be as best as they can possibly be. And, again, this isn't really a fully new edition. It's a revitalization of the rules. But if you're going to say, hey, we're going to double down on this, this would be an opportunity to say, hey, we're giving you all this new stuff, but also, look, we have a digital tool set integrated from the get-go of this to make your life easier. Again, I sincerely think they should purchase D&D Beyond or something like that. That would be the best bet. People are already invested in it. And then it would just continue to further it forwards. Maybe add a digital tabletop to D&D Beyond. I don't know. Something like that, though. Number 3. Ability score or stat equality. We have certain abilities are what people call power stats. Whether that's true or not is another story. But dexterity, for example, is often considered a power stat. Dexterity determines your initiative score. It determines your dexterity saving throw bonus, one of the most common saving throws you'll encounter in the game. It's let's see, I don't know if I just said initiative or armor class, but it's unarmored armor class or light/medium armor class. It's initiative score. It's dexterity bonus, like we said. It is also several different skill checks, which is, obviously like stealth and sleight of hand, acrobatics. It's also ranged weapon attacks, like things like a crossbow and a longbow. It's also finesse-based weapons, like daggers, rapiers, and things like that. And there are certain classes, like the rogue, for example, where you can just put all of your points into dexterity, and kind of the rest doesn't matter. Obviously, there's instances where it does, so you take that with a grain of salt. But your lock-picking abilities as well, tied to dexterity. So, for example, as a rogue, with dexterity, you're getting your attacking stat, your armor class, your initiative. All of this stuff is all tied to dexterity. And you compare that to something like strength, which is just deplorable in comparison. Strength governs your strength saving throws, which are relatively rare in the grand scheme of things. Your carrying capacity, which in most instances that I've played in, my DMs either don't focus on carrying capacity at all, or relatively early on, you get access to something like a bag of holding or some sort of extra dimensional space, which sort of negates the need for you to be very strong and carry capacity-wise. Again, it works great in a video game where you pick stuff up and you drag it into your inventory and it tells you that you're encumbered. Again, digital tool sets like D&D Beyond can also help with that. But if your DM, say, makes up a random homebrew magic item in a digital tool set like D&D Beyond and don't have an assigned weight for it, it doesn't attribute anything to you when you add it to your character sheet. And it does the athletics check, which, again, is the only strength-based check on the entire list of skills. And again, that could either be, it's only as important as you or your DM make it to be. For grapples, that's important for grappling, sure, for actually making the grapple, but escaping a grapple can be done with an athletics or an acrobatics check. So more often than not, people are dexterity based, they can get out of it. And it only governs melee attacks and then thrown weapon attacks for things that are not finesse. So there's clearly a difference in power level of dexterity versus something like strength. And just about every class, with the exception of, like, I guess a barbarian, because some of their abilities specifically reference strength, like a fighter or a paladin, often considered to be strength-based classes, could just be dexterity-based, and there's no issues there. The only thing would be if you want to wear heavy armor, you need to have a minimum, like for plate mail, for example, you need to have a minimum of 15 strength to not suffer any drawbacks. But that's assuming you don't have access to something like mithril plate mail, or you're a dwarf who doesn't suffer any negative consequences for wearing, heavy armor, things like that, or movement-related consequences for it. Same thing would also be things like wisdom and charisma, wisdom a little bit more so, versus intelligence, right? Intelligence governs the knowledge-based skills and investigation, which could be very useful in your campaign, depending on how your DM runs it, or almost not at all. And then the casting stat for basically wizards, now that we have artificers, that too, and a couple of subclasses. Versus wisdom, which is powering your wisdom saving throw, also an extremely common saving throw that you will make, and some of the more dangerous things tied to it. It is a casting stat for certain classes, like, say, cleric, druid, and ranger. It also powers perception, the most important skill in the game, as well as several other important skills like survival, animal handling, insight. And then again, same thing on the other side with charisma. Again, charisma saving throws not too common, but it's a casting stat for 4 different classes in the game, and it covers all of the social skills. You know, deception, persuasion, all that kind of stuff. So there's clearly a disparity there, right? Strength and intelligence being 2 of the ones that are very weak compared to the other skills. Obviously, Constitution is useful for everybody. There are no skills associated with it, but concentration checks and things like that. So Constitution's kind of in its own area. But, you know, Dex, Wisdom, and Charisma are clearly more generally broadly useful for everyone compared to Intelligence and Strength. Depending on the class you pick, more often than not, you will either be dumping Strength, Intelligence, or in some instances, possibly Charisma. And yeah, I mean, I don't know how you do that. Things that I've done in my game are, for example, give you bonus language proficiencies for positive points of Intelligence modifier. It's not a huge buff, but it helps a little bit. I've allowed 2-handed weapon damage with a strength-based weapon to do 2 times, or sorry, not 2 times, 1.5 times your strength modifier. That's something I sampled from older editions. You know, so rather than doing your strength modifier, it does 1.5 times your strength modifier to give them a little bit more damage. Doesn't really fix, I feel like, ultimately the disparity between the two, but it helps a little bit. Number 2. Templates. I've talked about templates before. We have a couple in the monster manual. We have like the Shadow Dragon template, the Half Dragon template, things like that. But these are basically a skin, or really a template, that you apply to something to change it and make it something else. So for example, you could have a giant, a frost giant, let's say, and then you could apply the Half Dragon template to it, and it becomes a Half Dragon frost giant, and now it is an entirely new monster. More of these kinds of templates, whether it be a whole book or just a handful or a section in the new updated monster manual, allows you to effectively double the amount. One solid template that's applicable across all different creature types allows you to double the amount of monsters. So let's say the monster manual has 150 monsters in it, and you have this, you know, we call it the improved or the dire, call it the dire template, right? Which makes everything slightly more bestial, slightly more dangerous, right? And you have the dire template now, and let's say, for instance, in this example, it's applicable to every type of creature. You could have a dire humanoid if you wanted to, right? You've now made that number of monsters go from 150 for one little tiny template stat block to go to 300. You know, and if you have 10 stat blocks, you've just, you know, you've multiplied the amount of monsters and things you have access to by 10. Now, again, you might have some like fiendish, right? A fiendish type. So it could be a fiendish doppelganger or a fiendish gnoll or a fiendish bugbear, right? Obviously, fiendish probably wouldn't be applicable to the celestial angel type creatures. Same thing on the other side, celestial versions wouldn't be applicable to the devils and the demons. But you have all these different templates, and maybe some of these will be coming in Mordenkainen's Monsters of the Multiverse in January. But you build out a solid slew of templates, and it allows your DMs to have a ton more versatility without having to just make new monster source books. It's really a no-brainer. That's why so many third-party people, whether they be on the DMs Guild, published sources, or otherwise, they will make templates. They'll add templates into their books because it allows you to just whatever, like if I make my own third-party monster book with Ted's 100 Monsters, Nerd Immersions, Nefarious Ne'er-Do-Wells book with 100 new monster types, I'm going to put like 5 to 10 templates in there because now my 100 monsters becomes 500 or 1,000, and I can still keep it within the frame of one book. It's just really a simple thing. It's a no-brainer. I feel like you gotta do this, but I guess we'll see ultimately when in 2 years' time. Number 1. More elemental spells. I mean, it seems, again, like a no-brainer when you have certain classes that you've designed, and maybe things will get changed when the final versions of these classes get updated or subclasses get updated in 2024. But a great example would be the Draconic Sorcerer from the Player's Handbook, right? You choose a dragon type, and that affects the type of spells. You know, you can alter and do more damage and things like that with the type of spells that you choose. That's great. But You know, if you were to look at, say, fire spells, there's a ton of awesome fire spells in the game. How many acid spells are there if you want to be a black dragon sorcerer? It's like 5, maybe, acid spells that do acid damage. Acid Splash, Vitriolic Sphere, Melf's Acid Arrow, with the exception of the newer ones like Tasha's Caustic Brew. That might be all of them. Maybe you probably have less than 10. Same thing with, like, thunder spells or lightning spells. You have a little bit more lightning spells, but cold damage spells, poison damage spells, there's not a lot. So if you build out the amount of different spells that are accessible to multiple different classes, but also allow them to have more elemental type spells so they have things to choose from, right? So say you wanted to be a blue dragon sorcerer, you're like, okay, I've got Chromatic Orb for level 1, and then I've got Lightning Bolt as a 3rd level spell, and maybe Thunder Step, I think, is also a 3rd level spell. And it's like, well, now I don't have anything till Chain Lightning at, like, 6th level. It's just like I can't really build my class around being a Pyromancer or a Cryomancer or a, you know, whatever kind of Mancer I want to be, because I'm really, you know, I have to take fire spells because that's if I want to do damage, right? That's the most of the spells in the game are fire related. So that would be something, and then I guess to a lesser extent in this would also be updating like stat blocks to cover new spells. I've talked about it in the past in like my fixing series, but for example, like the Tempest Cleric, for example, had like Insect Plague as an option, but like in recent when they added new spells, like Storm Sphere was a spell they added, which would have fit much better than Insect Plague, but they didn't want to go back and adjust things, so they kept it the way it was. So adjusting like predetermined domain spells or whatever the case may be for other classes to give them spells. For example, I don't know why the Tempest Domain Cleric couldn't just have, why they had to have Call Lightning and not Lightning Bolt, for example. Like that just feels like it would have been a nice little change rather than giving the Cleric another concentration spell. I don't know, things like that. So anyway, this one was definitely a little bit longer than the last video, but I had some time to think about it after I made it, and just, of course, I make the video, and then I immediately think of 10 more things that I want to cover. So, I don't know how everyone will feel about all of these, but like I said, I wanted to try and put this out there as more things, because I'm sure, you know, who knows, I might make a 3rd video at some point if I think of another 10. But let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Am I far off base on these? Do you like these concepts? And then, you know, if I was completely off base by any of the things that I'd mentioned, please let me know in the comments down below. Thank you to my patrons over on Patreon who did not technically vote for this, but they voted for the first one, so I'm giving everybody a bonus version of that. And again, if you haven't subscribed, consider doing so. I'd appreciate it. And I will see you all next time.